we today are going to go through a case live. I've never met Arjun before the last couple of minutes, and we didn't even really get a chance to say hi. So there's no background here. This is going to happen live. He doesn't know what's coming at him, and I don't quite know much about you, Arjun. So I would love it as we start off here if you could just introduce yourself to everybody, a little bit about your, kind of where you're at currently, and also the recruitment journey that you're on.
Yeah, sure. So I am currently a consultant within the technology implementation practice at Deloitte. My recruiting journey back in the day was very familiar to straight from a campus hire. Did a bunch of cases back then got off track. I've been trying to be in that journey one more time. I'm trying to see a few different options. So currently, I'm in the initial phases of just networking with some firms, and I'm trying to get back into my casing practice. So that's where I am right now. I have a few of first initial conversations with A.T. Kearney lined up. So that's something that I'm trying to work towards right now.
So how many years was it back that you were casing the first time?
It's been 3 years now. So, and then of course I cased a little last November. So maybe a month or two just to refresh on my skills a little. So it's definitely a skill that you can tend to forget. So for sure, looking forward to this.
Yeah, awesome. And just real quick, what feels different about this time around?
I feel the one thing that feels different is that maybe 3 years back, I only knew like some of the more traditional ways to get your casing get more proficient. So maybe I just had case in point to rely on. But in the last 3 years, I see so many things have been coming up. The casing community has definitely grown. So finding casing partners all around the world has been easier for sure. So I have people from Malaysia, UK, Nigeria, US, everywhere. So that's been amazing.
Oh, it's exciting. And if I heard you correctly, you're moving from a technology focused role to a more general focused role. Is that the
Yes.
intent?
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly. Yep.
great. All right. Well, with that introduction, would love to walk you through a case today. You ready for it?
Yeah, sure.
Great. So Arjun, excited today to propose to you this potential opportunity that I have. A friend asked me if if I'd be willing to and want to buy his coffee shop in Vail, Colorado. He's offering $100,000 for it. Where would you start?
Oh, that sounds really interesting. I'm actually a coffee aficionado, so looking forward to working through this proposal that your friend has for you. I think the first step here would be I have a few questions here. Is that what are your goals and what's driving you to look into this opportunity personally?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the biggest thing for me would be wanting to really dive into the financials and the profitability of the business first, and understand whether or not it is not only financially viable but an attractive opportunity. And for the time being, that's where the majority of my effort would be.
Gotcha. Makes sense. And then just wanted to know if there is a time horizon that you personally would want to look at in terms of personal ROI or something that you had in mind before we dive in. If there's something that you would like to share.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at I'm looking over the next 5 years, let's say.
Okay. So pretty long term. Sounds good. Um, So just to reiterate, you have a five-year horizon, and you're mostly concerned with financials and profitability, trying to see if this would be a venture worth your time and money. Is that correct?
Hmm.
All right. I think I have enough information, and unless you have something more specific that you want to look into, would you mind if I just like maybe come up with a framework and then we can dive in?
Okay, that sounds great.
Sure. Sound good. All right. So I think I have a starting point right now. So to dive into this and like analyze it from, I would like to look into three separate categories. Firstly, I'd like to look into the whale coffee market in general. I'd then like to specifically zone into our coffee shop that your friend has been running since. And then the last would be I'd like to zoom into what you would be able to bring to the table and what your goals and your 5-year journey might look like. So let's dive into the coffee market first in Vail. Um, First, I'd like to understand how broad is this market that we're talking about. So I'm going to assume that there might be a lot of seasonality, which might be affecting this coffee market, especially due to a lot of tourism that is basically more towards the winter months, popular ski resorts. So that might make our sales very sporadic. So I'd like to understand what that looks like. I'd like to also look into our competition. I would assume that there might be quite a lot of chains in Whale as well. I've personally seen that there are multiple popular chains in these segments where most of the tourists are staying at. So I'd like to understand what are how do we fit into the market and how do we compete with these other chains which probably have multiple outlets as well. Secondly, I'd like to understand more into our coffee shop now. I'd like to understand what our model is, who our customers are. I'd like to understand if there is are we straight working out of a brick and mortar store, or are we giving any online kind of facilities? So maybe we have a website where people can come in and buy the coffee that we have. Maybe we sell some merchandise online as well. So just thinking out loud, some customers might have walked in, they were tourists, they really like the coffee. So just for memory's sake, they go back home, they probably want something as a member. So maybe something like that. I'd then like to look into our revenues and profit margins. I'd like to understand how much are we generating year on year. So has there been a growth in that trend, or at least I'd like to see a little bit of growth over the years. and I like to see if what our profit margins are. So basically, how our cost structure looks like, and I like to um, see what the value chain looks like. How are we sourcing our coffee? How are we sourcing the raw materials? What does our distribution look like? And um, in case we have an online model where we are trying to do sales as well, apart from the sales in store. And then lastly, I'd like to do an ROI analysis. I'd like to understand how soon we could recuperate that $100,000 and start generating profits. Lastly, I'd like to dive a little into your specific skills. So I'd like to understand if what is driving you to get into the coffee business. Have you been in some certain businesses, maybe the restaurant business, which might give you an edge or somewhat of a background on how to run this? I'd also like to understand what your thoughts are in terms of taking this business. So, are you open to having, like, explain, opening newer stores future in down the line? So maybe we want to expand geographically as well. Also want to understand if you would be looking forward to different streams of revenue, like I mentioned. So if we are not selling online, or if we're not selling on Amazon, if that's a thing that we would want to look into as well. So those are a few things that come up right now, and I'd like to begin by first understanding what our return on investment would look like. So if you have any information on what revenues we're generating and what are our costs, that's something that I'd like to begin with, unless you want to zoom into something specific here.
Um, yeah, I certainly think that looking at some of the revenue and cost drivers are going to be critical here. Where would you want to start within that?
So if I could probably see on how many cups of coffee, or by the how many cups of coffee are we selling per year, and then try to work backwards towards what are the ingredients that we're using in a cup of coffee, and then see the cost structure, and maybe in that way we can see what a cup of coffee is costing us and how much money we are making per cup. And then from there we could just extrapolate on from previous sales, and if we have any information on year sales, we could also include that, if the growth percentage, into our margin, to see how much we could be expecting to make next year, if that sounds good.
Okay. Um, so we don't have the annual numbers, but we do have some data. Maybe we can utilize this to be able to build up from the bottom up. If you thought about it on more of a daily or weekly basis, how would you go about thinking through it then?
So if we just go from a daily basis, what where there therein I would like to see, and I'm just assuming that we are also selling some cookies or something on the side with the coffee. So I'd like to get a good idea about how many cups of coffee are we selling, and then maybe see that, like, what kinds of what's the percentage switch. So if we probably have like an espresso versus a regular drip coffee, how are those priced, and then bake that into a average, wherein we could realize that what are our revenues from coffee, and then of course what would be our revenues from any other side items that we might be selling, like cakes or muffins. From there, like, once I have a realistic idea of what we can do per day, I like to also be very careful here and think about that we might be selling more over the weekend. So like you alluded to, that the weekly average might be a good sign for us. So if we had weekly numbers, that would be better. But if I had daily numbers, I would like to get at an average, what an average day would look like out of the 365 days that we have. Once we have that information, I'd like to concentrate on the cost side. So some of the costs, of course, apart from the standard cost that you would see for, like, paying the employees, paying the rent, utilities, there would be raw material costs as well. And that's where I would want to concentrate and see that what does our cost structure look like, how much would we be making into one cup of coffee, and then maybe, let's say, one cupcake, and then we can go from, once we have that, now those numbers, we can extrapolate it for the day and or for the year then.
Okay. Um, in terms of your hypothesis about selling more on the weekend, what do you think would be driving that?
So my hypothesis about selling more on the weekend would just be that people usually take weekend skiing trips. So there would be more influx due to the tourists that, like I alluded to in my framework as well. So due to that, it might be just a little more. I would assume that we would not have a lot of business customers there who would just like be doing a drive-through. So I'm expecting that our model would more be of an experience where people want to come in, sit and enjoy their coffee, and then probably are on a vacation. So that's where maybe a bulk of our sales might be coming from. So that's what my hypotheses were, saying that like maybe over the weekend. So like a Friday to Sunday might be something where we see higher sales.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. So um, the coffee shop does do more business on Saturday. The coffee shop is open 6 days a week, and all of the, you know, all of Saturday is considered to be busy. However, on Monday through Friday, um, only the first and last 2 hours of the day are considered busy hours.
And would you care to explain what our operating hours are? I'm thinking more of a 8 to 5. If that, does that sound good?
Mm. It's open 12 hours a day for each day that it's
Uh-huh.
open.
Okay. Okay. So I'm just thinking here that like you said that the first two and the last 2 hours on Mondays to Fridays is where the bulk of our sales might be coming to. So I would then think that I would probably take 4 hours for those 5 days to get to an estimate, and then I would add the 12 hours for Saturday, assuming that we are busy throughout. So if we can then now look at what our hourly sales are, then we could just start building onto what a weekly would look like, and then what yearly would look like.
Okay.
Does that sound like a reasonable approach?
Yes. So in the busy hours, the coffee shop sees 20 customers per hour. But in the slow hours, the coffee shop only gets 10 customers per hour.
Okay. All right. So we have customers, and do we know an average spend, what a average customer usually spends when they are there?
Hmm. Um, yes, if we go ahead and consider our products into three main categories: coffee, pastry, and bottled water, then approximately 60% of our customers order coffee, 30% order pastry, and 10% order a bottle of water.
Gotcha. So that basically just puts us, we have 20 customers an hour, and I'm just thinking that I'm just going to do everything for the hour, and then we can figure out the rest for the week or the year, whatever we feel like as and when we progress. So 60% are buying coffee, 30% are buying pastry, and 10% are buying bottled water. Do we know how much are we charging for the coffee, pastry, and bottled water?
Yes, a cup of coffee costs $4, a pastry is $3, and bottled water is $2.
Gotcha. Um, So I think I have enough information right now to actually think what our revenues are on an hourly basis. But before diving into that, do we have any cost information on the coffee based, or a profit margin? I'm just trying to see what profit we would generate.
Yeah, in terms of the variable cost there, you could consider that all of these products have a 50% margin.
Gotcha, a 50% margin. All right. So we are making $2 on every coffee, $1.5 on every pastry, and $1 on every bottled water. We have 20 customers per hour, so I'm just going to break that down into the 60, 30, and 10. So 60% of 20 would just be 12. 30% of 20 would be 6, and then that leaves us two customers buying a bottle of water every hour. Herein, we can just calculate what our hourly profits look like. And these are, of course, the busy hours. So we just would have 12 customers giving us $2 of profits, plus 6 customers giving us $1.5 of profit. And then we can add the 2 customers for $2 of profit. So that gets us to $24 plus $9 plus $2. So that's just, I want to be right here. So $35 per hour in the busy hours is what we can expect to make. And then we just see 10 customers an hour. So I'm just assuming we can just take this profit to be half. So $17.5 per hour in the slower hours that we have. So if we assume for a normal workday, Monday to Friday, we have 4 busy hours generating $35 per hour, and we have 8 slow hours generating 17.5. And then on the weekend, of course, on Saturday, we just have 12 busy hours wherein we are making $35 per hour. So that just puts us at 35 times 4 for the busy for a weekday, which would just give me 4 times 30 is 120, 4 times 5 is 20. That's $150.
Check that again.
Oh, $140.
Mm-hmm.
And then 8 times 17.5 would just give me, let me really quickly do this. So that's another $140 from the 8 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So just brings us at $280 on a normal weekday. And for our weekend, we can just do 35 times 12 would just be 350 plus 70, which would just give us $420. So 280 on a normal week, normal day, and 480. So I would just like to multiply the 280 with 5 to get the weekly total here. Just brings me at $1,400 plus the 42 of plus the 420. So that's approximately $1,820 that we can expect to make on a weekly basis. Of course, this does not account for any of the fixed costs that we spoke about. So I'd like to understand what our fixed costs look like, apart from the $100,000 that we are thinking of investing here.
So what would that be on a 50-week year?
So just on a 50-week year, it would be, and do you mind if I just round that off to $1,800 instead?
No, go ahead and calculate it all out.
So that just gives me $90,000 on a yearly basis. I'm assuming that we have 50 weeks just for simplicity. I can definitely do 52 if you want.
No, interested in 50. What was your weekly profit total?
My weekly total profits were at $1,820.
All right, let's back that out again. So you had 280 for a weekday.
Mm-hmm.
And what was your Saturday total?
My Saturday total was 420. Oh, I think I missed the zero there. No, yeah, that's fine. That's $420, yeah.
So during the 5-day work week, what did that total?
The 5-day work week, that would just be 1820.
5 times 280.
Mm-hmm. So that gives me 1400, and then if I add the 420, it gets me to the 1820 figure.
Okay. And then 1820 over a 50-week year
Mm-hmm.
got you to what?
Approximately 90,000, but it's 91.
Okay, great. Great. And so that was a profit number you already looked at and included variable costs. You said you wanted to look next at what?
So I just wanted to understand if there are what our maintenance costs or like any other fixed costs might look like. Apart from the $100,000, of course. Otherwise, if we think that those might be negligible, and we just want to compare this, we are seeing a horizon of very close to like a month, a year, and a few months. So that's what we would get at for our return on investment otherwise. So I just like to understand if there are any other costs that we might want to bake into these before we jump to a conclusion that we can get an ROI of less than 1.2 years.
Yeah. Let's consider two main categories of fixed costs.
Mm-hmm.
Let's consider rent to be fixed, and let's
Yep.
consider wages to be fixed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Our monthly rent is just $500.
Okay. So 500 per month gets us to $6,000 a year. And
then we pay our staff $8 an hour.
$8 an hour. Do you have any information on how much staff do we usually have staff within an hour?
Yeah, we usually have 2 people on staff at any given time.
So that's effectively $16 an hour for wages. And from here on, I'd just like to I'll just calculate that sum for the year and then add $6,000 to it. $60,000 from the rent to understand what our fixed costs are looking like.
No, just 6,000. Yes.
Oh yeah, 6,000. Sorry, my bad. It's 6,000. So $16 an hour. We know that we are working 12 hours. So 12 times 6 times 50 would be the total number of hours. And then we can multiply that by 16 to give us the total cost that we are taking in wages. So that's just 12 times 300 times 16, which gives us 3,600 times 16, which is basically 36 times 16 would be 360 plus 216. So that's 576. So that's roughly $57,600 there. So if we see 57,600 plus the 6,000 for rent, which was $500 daily on a monthly. So that's $53,500, which basically would eat into the 91,000 figure. So 91K.
Where did 53,000 come from?
I added the wages to the $6,000 of rent.
And that gave you?
That gave me 53,500.
Didn't you just tell me you calculated the wages to be 57,600?
Oh yeah, oh, sorry. Yep, my bad. So I see that's a six there. So it's 63.5K.
Okay. Yeah,
Um, so
63.6. Yep.
yeah, so 63.6K and 91K, that leaves us at a difference of, give me just 1 second, and
Mm-hmm.
that should give us 26.4K profits on a yearly basis.
How much is that again?
$26,400.
Mm, check that one more time.
Sure. Um, okay, so that's 91K minus 64.6. So,
63.6.
oh, I think that's where I went wrong. I calculated it to be 63. Okay, so 10 minus 4, 6. That's 36.4.
So 91 minus 63.6 would be 27.4. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Sorry.
Okay. And what is that number?
So that should give us the profit for the year, taking into account all of our variable and fixed cost.
Okay. What else might we need to take into account?
Here, a few things that we probably could have thought about is if there are any marketing costs that we haven't taken into account. So we're probably marketing at Instagram would be something that we could probably marketing at. Maybe we are marketing towards Condé Nast, like want to get um, on an article which says 10 best coffee shops within Wales, or so those kind of things is something that I would like to look into.
Okay. Yeah. In terms of other cost categories, there isn't anything significant that we need to look into there. What else can you think of?
So other costs would be, I'd like to also understand what if we're losing out on any spillage or like shelf life. So I understand that a lot of times um, some of our product like pastries, if we're not keeping the correct inventory, we might be just incurring losses there. So I'd like to understand if that's a fact. And then another thing that we could look into is um, and I'm just assuming that all of our utilities are already taken into account here, just because they would be another fixed cost otherwise that we might want to look into.
Yes. So utilities, insurance, those would certainly be additional cost categories. Let's consider that those have already been included in the
Okay,
numbers that we've looked at.
all the bigger ones are
Yeah, and
included.
then inventory loss, that's a good consideration. Let's consider that we've already calculated that in terms of our overall cost of goods sold, variable costs. So all of our
Sure.
cost categories, let's say, have been covered. But what else might we want to consider?
Um, so all of our costs are covered. So you're just thinking about other expenses that we might be, so other unforeseen expenses.
No, as we think about the attractiveness of this opportunity, as we think about the potential for me to take this on, um, are we, you know, do we know
Um,
yet?
Yeah, so I think a few things that we should look into here is that how are you planning to finance this? So, do you have $100,000 ready to go, or are we thinking of taking a loan where we might be paying some interest on that as well? So, those are a few things that we might want to consider. I'd also want to understand. I'm not very familiar with how the FTA licensing works, but if it's a transferable fee or something like that, and I don't know if that's baked into the $100,000. So I'd like to understand if there are those legal implications which we might want to spend on as well while getting through the deal.
Okay. Okay. Um, so there would be, I would like to think about cost of capital in terms of calculating an NPV and considering the overall value of the business.
Okay, so are we trying to understand what, and I am not very well versed with the concept of NPV, but if you could just throw some light there, it would help me understand what we're trying to solve for here.
Okay. Okay. So if we were wanting to look at the present value, we would want to take the after tax profit, and there's a few different ways to do it, but let's say that we would then take the weighted average cost of capital. And now that I've thrown some of those terms in, would you know how to utilize those?
So I'm just trying to think about. So you're saying that the NPV here would be to take into account what the taxes we would be paying on a yearly basis on our capital gains.
Well, we would have to pay annual taxes as any business would on our revenues,
Yeah.
on our profits rather.
Yeah.
And so in thinking about present value, we would first want to make sure that we're thinking about the after tax profit. Mm-hmm.
Sure. So from the $27.4 thousand that we calculated,
Yep.
I'm not very. Do you mind if I just assume a 10% sales tax there?
Let's go ahead and take a 40% tax rate.
Oh wow. Okay. So a 40% tax rate would just make us very shy of. So I can just calculate the 60% to see what we'd be left over. So that is 274 times 6. I just want to make sure. So what I'm looking at is 60% of $27,400. So that would be 16,440.
Perfect.
So that's what we would be looking at in terms of how much we're making on a yearly basis. I think if this is something that we reach at, we can now probably look into how soon can we recuperate our investment. I remember that you said it should be 5 years. Looks like it might be more than that. We can get into the exact numbers, but from right now, it definitely seems that you will not be able to make the 100K back in 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I would agree with that.
From which understanding from what you shared with me, I would assume that either we try to brainstorm other revenue sources, other models like we spoke about initially, is to maybe try and explore online sales as another option of point of sales. Otherwise, I would at this point probably think that that $100,000 may be better suited towards another venture.
Okay. As we it sounds like that's your current recommendation. As we wrap up our time here, any other comments that you want to make?
From comments, I would say that here, a few things that I'd like to understand more about the case would have been probably opportunities to expand within those 5 years. That's something we might have probably not baked into our analyses. So maybe if we wanted to look into opening a sister store, maybe not in Vail, but maybe another skiing destination, either up north or down south. And I know there are quite a few there. Those are a few opportunities that we probably did not bake our analysis. So apart from that, I would think that from what we see right now, definitely it's not the same time frame or horizon that you were considering. So yeah, I would think that it wouldn't be the most wise thing given the 5 year horizon right now.
All right. All right, Arjun, that closes us out. Break. 5:46. Okay. Arjun, how'd that feel?
Yeah, feels like I need to work on elementary math again, but yeah.
You know what? Everybody needs to work on their mental math and basic math skills, so you're not alone in that. I understand that somewhat recently you got some math feedback. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
What did that sound like?
It basically was around like that my math was inconsistent. But I also feel like, especially in this case, I feel like this was very far off from what I usually am able to do in cases. So I feel like this was probably like a 2 on the math. I think at the end I just couldn't even subtract. Like I knew that I couldn't do it anymore. I probably I just don't know what happened there. But yeah.
Well, you know what? Not very many of us have the opportunity to case live in front of so many people. So I hope that you give yourself a big pat on the back and that you feel okay about this. Right now, I'm still now going to use this opportunity to give you some critical feedback.
Yes,
and
please.
so that we can all learn from this experience. And you are getting a slew of applause hands and nice job, pat on the backs from chat. Along with those, everybody with us, if you would like to submit some questions, then you can start to do that now. I'm going to give some feedback on the case and give some thoughts. And then with the time we have left, I will try and hit as many of your questions as possible. So, all right. This was more in the realm of an unstructured case, right? This is something that you could get as a first round or a second round case. There were no exhibits. There weren't any exhibits that we tried to hit. This case took us today 37 minutes. And we didn't even do an NPV, whack calculation. With that calculation included, this is something that we should be able to get through in 35 minutes, or somebody at the top of their game would be able to get through in 30 minutes or less. Now, to be able to do that, it's not only about being just a little bit more efficient with the math, but it's about driving the conversation forward in a more direct way and asking for the data and information that you want next. And throughout this conversation, I started with very little information, very little prompts to give you, right? We have this opportunity. I could buy a coffee shop from my friend in Vail, Colorado for $100,000. Should I do it? You asked a couple of good questions up front. You did not seem to be fazed by the short prompt. I thought that was really good, really nice job of you. You asked me what my objectives were. Great question. You also asked about time horizon. In general, many of you know that time horizon is kind of a gray area question for me. But in this case, I did have that information to give you. Even if you hadn't asked that question up front, it would have come into the conversation later on. So I don't know. It didn't really change the way that you wrote your structure, but I still did have that information to give you. And I told you that up front. And what did I tell you? I told you I'm interested in 5 years, and really up right now, I'm interested in whether or not this is a financially good opportunity for me. Is this going to be profitable? That's your nudge, Arjun. That's your kick to say, well, then let's talk about profit. Let's talk about and really figure out whether or not this is financially attractive. You went with more of an external view in terms of the structure that you created in the next step, a little bit more of that market study view. Let me understand the overall market and, the veil. Maybe there's some seasonality. Let's understand the shop. Let's understand more about your objectives. I think the better way to go with the prompt that you had and the nudge that I gave you would be to focus all around profit, focus around the profit drivers. I really want to understand the different things that are driving revenue. I want to understand the different components of costs. I want to understand, and you can add one of these external buckets or something else about, my broader objectives to that. But I thought it was a missed opportunity, partially because you asked me about objectives up front, and yet then it still maintained, it still had a whole section in your structure. Um, and instead of, and maybe it just could have been more about new opportunities, would have been maybe a new way to phrase that. The way that it came out was a little bit like you questioning me and my competence to run a coffee shop, right?
Okay.
I want to know more about your background and experience, and it wasn't, it was just on the shy edge of judgy, I felt like.
Got
And it
you.
was like,
Okay.
I would never want Arjun to sound like that in front of one of my clients. And so for any hint of something like that to come out in the interview process, they're not bad questions, but I think just a little bit of shifting, a little bit of reframing so that you wouldn't be perceived in that way, I think would have been good. But really the bulk, even if you looked at your structure and the way that you talked through it, it was all around that shop category, right? That would have been, even in that 2 minutes in silence, that's a good trigger to you to say, oh, do I need to break this up into multiple buckets, or can I reformulate my structure and my strategy real quick because it's so loaded in one category? And so it ended up being like, well, I want to understand about the shop, and then let's understand about the revenue, and then let's understand about the costs, and then let's understand about the ROI. And there kind of ended up being these subcategories. And so overall, an interviewer is going to sit there and say, it wasn't a strong structure because there seemed to be, it wasn't weighted equally. There were confusing subcategories, and it didn't seem best matched and best suited to the prompt that you were originally given. It also took you 45 seconds to get to actually talking through any of the content in your structure. And those of you who've heard me speak before tell you, I want you to tell that thesis statement quickly and be able to say, there's three main things I want to look at here: the market, the coffee shop, and your broader objectives. So let's dive into that first one. Okay, more about the market. Instead, you told me a little bit about each of the three categories before you dived in. And I wasn't quite sure, because it almost took a minute to get there. I wasn't sure if you just gave me a very short structure presentation or if it was a very long introduction to your structure. It was the latter, but that's a minute that you could have saved, right? Basically speaking. And so, you took about 2 minutes and 20 seconds in your pause to create the structure. And then with that elongated introduction to the structure, overall, you talked for over 4 minutes on the entirety of the structure before we dove into any specifics. I didn't hear a clear hypothesis within the structure about specifically where you wanted to start. And you did end up telling me and saying, I want to understand more about the profitability and the revenue and cost drivers. But then I pushed you a little bit further. Okay, well, even within that space, yes, that's what's most important to me. Well done, well identified. But what do you want to actually know within that? You first started asking if we already knew things at an annual level. No, we got to put case math in there. You got to make that, right? You're going to have to make the annual numbers come to life. We have things more of at a daily or weekly basis. So, there's this push and pull of information. I gave you a little bit, and then I wanted to see if you asked the right follow-up questions to dig in a little bit deeper. I gave you a little bit more push and pull, right? And I thought that you did a pretty good job at, whenever you had enough information to do a core calculation and to have some insights that came out of that, I thought that you did well. You don't want to just, data dump, and then have so many things available to you that you don't know what to do with them. But instead, we got some of the information about hours, products, revenue, variable cost, and you did some calculations as you went through. I thought that was a really wise thing to do. I questioned your move to calculate things on an hourly basis because, the least common denominator was a week. If you think about the dynamics going on within the business, there's busy hours and there's light hours. The weekdays are different than a Saturday. We're not open on Sunday. So if you put all those complex things together, then I think it was a more straightforward approach to solve towards what it looks like over a week. and think about that as a unit. Instead, you looked at, a busy hour, and then you had to still translate that into a slow hour. And then you had to translate that into a weekday. And then you had to translate that into overall in the week. And so if instead you had looked at, okay, let me think about it in terms of a week, how many customers come in over a week? And then across that week, how much is coming in terms of revenue for each of these 3 product categories? What does that translate in terms of profit? You would have had to do, I think, fewer calculations overall. You also would have had to deal with fewer fractions as you went through,
Yes.
because you
Yep.
were, working on a larger base. Um, and so as we continue to move through, largely speaking, Arjun, I think that you did pretty well on the majority of the math. You talked me through what you were doing. You did some of the math mentally or verbally. You didn't do all of it on your paper. You stayed still engaged with me as you were doing math on your paper, but you weren't able to stay strong from start to finish on the math. And so as we got part of the way through, you started to lose numbers. You said the correct number, and you maybe even wrote down the right number, and then it translated and transitioned into a different number. And so, that's just a combination of nerves and practice, right? I think that you're going to be able to kind of nail that in, hone that in a little bit more. We went through a process fairly early on where I had you go back and walk me through the math a little bit more closely. And you hadn't done anything wrong, right? Now, that happened at least once. When we went through and I had you recalculate with me kind of what it ended up being on like a daily basis or a weekly basis or something. Let me just tell everybody, like, that can happen, and you just need to stay okay, because what's probably happening in that moment is you've probably decided to do the math in a different way than what the answer key looks like. And that means that I have to like really track and follow along and make sure that you're doing the math correctly and that we're going to get to the right answer in the end, So it was not necessarily a negative on you at all that I say, hey, pause, slow down for a second. Walk me through your thinking. What are you doing? What are the numbers that you're using? What did it come to? I'm punching along on my calculator at the same time. I don't have to do the mental math, right? You're the one in the hot seat. But I need to follow along and make sure that you're getting the numbers right, that it was no judgment on you at all. But you did something different to the answer key that I had in front of me, because you chose to go the hourly route, right? And so I had to fully backtrack with you and follow along and make sure that we were on the same page.
Gotcha.
So that's just another reason why, in the moment, feel the freedom to stay calm, because you haven't necessarily done anything wrong. And even if you do a little thing wrong, then you catch it, you change it, and you keep moving forward, right? We got towards the end. You calculated profits. We talked about cost categories. We were looking at the 5-year horizon. And then I said I wanted to look at, it's like, well, not really cost of financing, but I want to consider like cost of capital. I want to do a net present value. Honestly, I liked how you quickly leaned in and said, I don't have a lot of familiarity in that space. If you could shed some light on that for me. If 100% that like, I don't know the formula for that, like, I don't know how to think about that, I don't know how to look at that, then I was disappointed that you didn't know how to think about that. But I would much rather go the direct approach that you took today than kind of wait and flail and, kind of pretend like you know what you're doing and then that you don't. Like, I'd rather you be direct. So I really appreciated that in your approach. And then I gave you a little bit of information and a few more terms. And then I kind of paused to see if you could make anything of that and kind of whether or not you could interpret that information. And I thought that you had some good commentary at that point as well. Really, then there was an opportunity. Okay, well, if net present value in the way that I want to look at it is going to include after-tax profit, then we need to calculate after-tax profit. And I've given you all the numbers up until this point in the case. So there wasn't really any need to assume that at this point in time at the very end that you were going to need to guess the tax rate. Absolutely, that just could have been something that you asked directly of me, right? Kind of leaning into that. I was giving you an opportunity to lean into the conversation and try and drive it forward, even when I knew that you probably don't know the NPV calculation that I want you to do. And then I would have told you, I want you to use a 10% weighted average cost of capital, WACC. And I might have even talked you through the formula that I wanted you to use. But then at the end, we didn't really have time for that. We kind of ran out of time. And you got the key insight, which was based on the numbers I have in front of me, it doesn't seem like if you're looking at a 5-year time horizon that you're going to make a return on this investment. And in fact, if we had done the full calculation, it wouldn't have looked attractive either. So there was no real new information. There was just one new calculation, one additional calculation we didn't end up getting to in this case today. Now, the last comment I have is at the very end here. You gave me a pretty strong recommendation. Where we're at right now, it just doesn't seem like, it would be a good opportunity. Maybe there's a better investment for your $100,000. So I, as the interviewer, have to sit here and say, well, am I going to give you another opportunity to do a full recommendation? Or we're already kind of out of time. So instead, I just gave you a little, all right, well, your recommendation was fairly clear. Anything else you want to say as we wrap up? And I think that threw you a little bit because you didn't get to structure the full recommendation. And so in that sense, I think that I think that you can allude to where your recommendation is leaning as you go through the case, but especially if you have a sense that, you're already 25, 30, 35 minutes in. I don't want to take the thunder and kind of give a structured recommendation before the actual recommendation, because you could find yourself in a position where you were in just here today. Now, the pieces that we're still missing, I think you still could have given a structured answer at the very end around additional risk areas that you saw and additional areas to investigate into. It didn't feel like you had quite a lot to say there. And so I always push everybody that take a quick look back at your structure. There was other ideas that you had come up with, like diving into and understanding. I had a little bit of information even that I could have given you about the market, which we didn't end up getting to. Some other things about expansion opportunities, new stores, merchandise. You spent quite a bit of time in the structure talking about merchandise, and then that didn't really come up and come out again. So I think that there would have been opportunities to perhaps glance back, maybe even take a very, very brief pause and say, okay, well, I've already said that I don't think the recommendation makes sense, but what are other things that we could look into? What are other next steps that I could recommend at this point in time? You could have leaned into that a little bit more. So those are my thoughts and my comments for you today. Some of the areas that I think that you could, kind of improve on.
Thanks, Stephanie.